Mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
And Amy, and here we are a couple days from the anniversary of the January 6th desecration, and you have the Democrat Socialists and their comm shop, the D.C. Press Corps, in full lather about January 6th. Kinzinger is going to be on Colbert this week, and Steny Hoyer is suggesting that flags be lowered to half staff to commemorate the failed insurrection, their terminology. And we told you what would happen a year ago, right after what occurred on January 6th, that the effort to demonize not the people who broke the law, but to use the people who broke the law to demonize anyone who even voted for Trump, no matter how begrudgingly. You're all part of an extremist movement unless you repent. And so they've spent the better part of the year beating that big lie, if you will. And now, as the commission returns to its earnest work under the stewardship of Representative Benny Thompson from Mississippi, now they go to phase two, where they bring in academics who do surveys and tell you just how big the threat is. We need to remember January 6th, not for the lawlessness, the failure of police, perhaps some failed response from the White House or confusion about what the response should be, even though there was an effort to offer overwhelming force that was rejected by all of those beating the insurrectionist drum in advance of January 6th last year. President Trump, 10,000 National Guard, no, we don't want them. That's erased from history, of course, at least in terms of what the big liars are saying. So now comes Robert Pape, University of Chicago terrorism expert. And I know this guy, and actually we've had him on this show before. He did a survey. And so now it's to put what happened and the 700-odd people who breached the Capitol in context, what they represent. So you extrapolate from the profile of the 700 to say there are millions more like them that could be plotting their next coup, waiting for election returns they don't like, and then they spring. And it's the end of our democracy. Pape on the January 6th desecrationists on Face the Nation over the weekend.
Exactly right, Margaret. What we're seeing is a movement that is a mainstream movement, not simply confined to fringe elements. And this is important because we're so used to thinking of right-wing extremism, or really extremism in general, as part of the fringe. They're just a tiny fraction of America, less than 1%. And they come from people that are economically destitute, many often unemployed. Well, that's not what our studies of the January 6th, those who broke into the Capitol on January 6th show, or our studies of the insurrectionist sentiments in the country.
And what you found is that some of these people were business owners. They were employed. These were people who had something to lose. They were putting things at risk when they went to Washington and carried out this violence.
Absolutely. Very striking finding is their economic profile. Over half of the 700 who broke into the Capitol, who've been arrested so far for breaking into the Capitol, are business owners, CEOs, from white-collar occupations, doctors, lawyers, architects, and accountants.
They're among you. They could be in your workplace, just like the unvaccinated. This is how boogeyman politics gets legitimized. Who is telling them what to do? These business people, these CEOs, these accountants and lawyers, Professor Pape.
Well, we can see their media consumption from surveys that we've done after our studies of who broke into the Capitol. We find that fully 21 million people believe two radical beliefs in America today. One, that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president, and two, that the use of force to restore Donald Trump to the presidency is justified. And their media sources of those 21 million, they come from 42% of the 21 million. Their main media source is Fox News.
Fox News is a tool of terrorism. It's radicalizing accountants and lawyers and CEOs, white-collar job holders, to descend on the Capitol and destroy our democracy. And you know why? Because they're white supremacists, too.
Race is an element, and race is a driver. So when we look at the counties that the 700 who broke into the Capitol came from, where they live, what we see is over half live in counties that Joe Biden won. They don't mainly come from the reddest parts of America. They're coming from San Francisco, Los Angeles, Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, Houston, and Dallas. Further, when we look at the key characteristic of why some counties and not others, what we see is the counties that sent the insurrectionists are the counties losing the most white population.
And he goes on to say, see, so it feeds into their belief in replacement theory, that there's a conspiracy afoot to replace white people with non-white people. Never mind, since he mentioned Chicago, we know in Chicago that 200,000 blacks have left in the last decade. We know in Chicago that the black population here has about halved in the last 30 years. But that doesn't matter, because Robert Pape is there to provide an academic seal, the intellectual seal on this crack pottery about the 1/6 insurrection that is only increasing in intensity a year later. It's really shameless, and I'm going to try and get Robert Pape on this show again. We'll see if he's got the cojones to go up against somebody a little bit tougher than Margaret Brennan, who just is there like a starry-eyed student, just dazzled by his survey research. This is shameful demagoguery of fellow Americans. And I'm not talking about the 725 arrested. I'm talking about using the 725 to vilify another 21 million, according to Pape. It's really, really serious business what these people are doing. And it needs to be called out and met head on, as far as I'm concerned. Let's find out what Jim Carafano, how Jim Carafano is concerned. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, Heritage Foundation, joins us for a weekly confab. Happy 2022, Jim. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention Robert Pape, who really, I think, is the academic equivalent of a drive-by shooter. His most famous and important research was this argument that suicide bombers were a response to occupation. And it got widespread attention, but it was also thoroughly debunked. One of the biggest insurrections against occupation was in Northern Ireland, where they had 0 suicide bombers. And it turns out that what they really found out was suicide bombing was taken up, which was actually invented by the Tamil Tigers, by the way, because it was an effective tactic. And so he commits, the most basic error of research, which is causation. Correlation equals causation.
Right.
In other words, because two things happen, that they're related. So just even his basic premise, which is that the 700 people that were arrested were insurrectionists, and 695 of them were just trespassers.
Well,
and then it goes from there really to draw ridiculous analogies.
So sorry to interrupt, but it's even more basic than that, the premise that is false from which he starts, which is that it was organized. And we know from the FBI's conclusion that there was no organization. It was, flotsam and jetsam that came over from the rally that was being held, and maybe there were agitators in the crowd and whatever that composition was. But the FBI, no friend of the former administration, I hasten to add, concluded there was no sort of organized assault on the Capitol.
Right. So this is research that this is the kind of research that's done in middle school, where you start with a conclusion and then you look for evidence to support it.
Mm-hmm.
So it won't stand, legitimate. I mean, it won't. A year from now, when the academics take it apart, people will be laughing at how bad this is.
Well,
but
yeah. And they don't even realize, you know how many Democrats, millions of Democrats in this country never thought President Trump was a legitimate president?
Yeah, like his
Right,
opponent in 2016.
Right.
Yeah, and they listen to MSNBC, and they listen to CNN. So but the other point is where's the research on BLM and Antifa, right? So if you were doing really legitimate research on extremism in this country, you would look at a range of activities by a range of actors and look at a range of outcomes, and then you would try to do some analysis. He's not doing that. All he's doing is starting with a conclusion and then looking for evidence to make it pure right. And the fact that he was even tested or brought on national television to share this junk just shows you it's a political agenda. It's not about truth seeking.
Well, no question. Something else, though, too. It also starts from another false premise that those people who showed up on January 6th to rally for Trump, to rally for the people that were challenging the returns in a handful of states, you're not allowed to have that opinion. You're not allowed to express that opinion. You're not allowed, if you're a member of Congress, Ted Cruz or others, to advance a legal argument. You're not allowed to do that. Because to do that is to undermine the legitimacy of the president-elect and destroy our democracy. So, and to do that is to be an extremist. It's not something Robert Pape couldn't contemplate that a lawyer or accountant or a CEO could come to the mall on January 6th because they thought something was hanky about the election or because they wanted to support President Trump. It's because they're racist and they're afraid of what's going on with the population demographics in big city America. I mean, it's just so reckless, those sort of statements.
It's a direct assault on free speech. I could say, I hate you all day long. That's just speech. Now, if I say I'm going to kill you, that's a crime. That may seem like a small difference, but it's a massive difference under the law, and it's a massive difference in protecting free speech in this country. Yeah, I saw this great cartoon. A guy said, I support free speech except hate speech.
Right.
And then the other guy in the cartoon says, I support science except gravity. It doesn't work that way. Look, what's more important than this Yahoo, who's not really a serious, well-respected academic, I believe, and it is literally wag the dog here, because the greater sin, of course, is a conspiracy on the part of elected officials to perpetuate this. Look, I don't know what we'll see what's in the report and everything else, but I just kind of use common sense. If they had actual proof that the President of the United States led an insurrection against this country, would we be sitting here waiting breathlessly on the first anniversary for them to rush onto weekend TV to give us the evidence? And the answer is likely not. If they had evidence, they would have actually produced the evidence. So,
right, but we've seen this act before, and it worked for them, I guess, before with the Russian collusion narrative. And Adam Schiff goes on TV and says, we've got something big coming, Benny Thompson's on TV over the weekend saying, we've got a testimony that's very important and we still need to go through it all. But, it's the whole something big is coming. We've got a smoking gun. And then when there's no smoking gun to back up their pronouncements, then they just move on and say, well, we were still right, even though the Steele dossier, turned out to be false. We were still right about his ties to, Russian oligarchs and so on and so forth. And then we're still right about Trump and his lack of a response, no matter what comes from this commission.
Right. And people forget, we had an impeachment of the president where they had an opportunity to provide all kinds of evidence.
Right.
And if they needed a year to collect the evidence, why did they impeach him a year ago? Well, because it was a political act. So yesterday on the news, there was breathlessly breaking news. And Representative Cheney came on to share this breathlessly breaking news that we now know where Donald Trump was during the insurrection.
Yeah, that he was watching TV.
TV, right. That sounds to me like a guy leading an insurrection. We now, Like we now know where Lenin was during the revolution. He was in a bar having, I mean,
Right.
It tells you nothing. There's no evidence. That's not evidence of anything. And even say that on television, like you've uncovered something, and like he's committed some kind of secret crime, like watching the TV in the living room is some kind of, or dining room is watching some kind of, conspiracy.
Well, they're upset that nothing happened for 187 minutes. That he should have done something. That they claim Ivanka came in twice to say, "Daddy, get on TV, tell them to stop it." But I don't believe that.
What does that even mean?
What
What is Ivanka saying? Daddy, stop it. But what kind of evidence is that?
Hearsay.
Completely without context.
I mean, let's have a counterfactual. Let's say Donald Trump jumped on television and said they should stop rioting.
Okay.
Do you think we wouldn't today be, having this investigation? Of course we would, because they would say, "Oh, well, he was just doing that to cover himself," right? Well, that didn't really mean anything, right?
He instigated it, right?
We saw this with Charlottesville. He never denounced the violence. He denounced it a number of times, and then they just ignore that he denounced it. So words matter, unless it's his words, then they don't matter, right?
That's right.
So
That's right.
Right now, today, as an independent analyst, not Republican, not Democrat, not conservative, not liberal, if somebody just put all this before me, and I would say, well, there is no there, and it looks, and this I think is really disturbing. It looks exactly like quid pro quo. It looks exactly like Russian collusion. It looks exactly like weaponizing media experts, congressional leaders, taking their power in political attacks against an opposing official. It's the kind of, if I can use the word on the radio, it's the kind of crap that is done in third world dictatorships when the guy out of power, is sent to jail by the guy who takes over, because that's what you do to your political enemies. It doesn't feel or sound like the democracy that we know and cherish.
Yeah, and speaking to that point, Benny Thompson is very open-minded about a criminal referral. We'll just have to see where the facts go, of course. Something else on the topic of extremism, since this is the raison d'etre for the Department of Defense, is rooting out extremism within the ranks of the military. That's what Lloyd Austin said last year. There was a report that was released over the holidays. Of course it was. And you'd be completely understood to not notice this because you didn't have Liz Cheney come on with breaking news about extremism in the ranks of the military or anybody else. The conclusion was fewer than 100 incidents over the past year of so-called extremist activity, as so defined by people looking for it and having to amass some sort of evidence to justify the last year of their work. Fewer than 100 incidents in a force of 2 million Americans. Responding to a 2018 request from then Representative Keith Ellison, DOD reported 27 incidents of extremist activity over the previous 5 years. So extremism within the ranks of the military, which is a big concern for Lloyd Austin, doesn't seem to have any, here we go again, a basis in the data.
Yeah, so if you actually read the report, it's kind of hilarious because essentially they said we found no extremism, but we know it's a big problem and we're going to fight it anyway.
Right.
Look, I mean, so where the upside to all this is, I think they've, jumped the shark. I mean, they're probably not old enough to even remember Happy Days, when Fonzie got on it, whatever, and jumped over a shark. Right?
Yeah, the water skis. Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I do. I mean, if you look at the polling is in the basement. If you look at the attention that's actually being paid to this, although it's featured on ABC and everybody's going to have specials and everything else, there's no anticipation for this. Americans are like, oh my God, I forgot about it, that insurrection thing, because look, I've been in countries where there have been insurrections. This is not what insurrection looks like. I mean, if there really was a movement in America to divide America, we would see that in our everyday lives, and it doesn't exist anywhere but on television, which makes you think that this insurrection is as much about American politics as Yellowstone is about a ranch, right? It's a TV show. And what we have here is we literally have members of Congress running a TV show and pretending like they're dealing in reality. But I think Americans kind of get it. I mean, if you look at the poll numbers, if you look at the political views of people, if you look at what people really care about and are interested in, it's like it's like the company that keeps making movies when nobody are interested in those movies anymore. It's like, dude, nobody wants to see Convoy 7, but they keep making them, or an Planet of the Apes movie, like when everybody else has moved on. Because they just don't know what else to do.
Yeah, it's the worst season of Homeland ever, Jim. Yeah. Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, VP of the Catherine and Shelby Cullum Davis Institute for International Studies at the Heritage Foundation, author of Brutal War, Jungle Fighting in Papua New Guinea, 1942. Jim, thanks as always.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
A while back, we at AmericanEagle.com were asked to build the e-commerce site of a major candy distributor. With the need for a website that could take into account everything from shipping times to local weather, because, candy melts, the task was not like taking candy from a baby. Fortunately, we live for a good digital challenge and free bonbons. So we got to work on a slew of complex integrations, including a shipping algorithm that factored in variables like distance, speed, and location. The website even let the end customer personalize their candy for special events, like weddings or, major website launches. When all was said and done, our client enjoyed a significant increase in traffic, which we were also well prepared for, and an increase in average order size. A sweet result indeed. For complex e-commerce sites, digital marketing, UX, and more, talk to the experts at AmericanEagle.com. Don't just